You're standing in a gravel driveway outside a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, watching a man pour tap water into what looks like a modified fuel tank bolted onto a 1987 Ford F-150. No gas, no diesel, no hybrid battery the size of a refrigerator. He turns the key. The engine starts. He drives 40 miles to the feed store and back, and when he pulls into the driveway again, the only thing that came out of that tailpipe was steam. This $2,000 system runs any gasoline engine on water using a conversion the Amish have been refining quietly for 35 years, and the fuel industry has spent $180 million since 1994 making sure your mechanic has never heard of it. After last week's video on the earth cooling system, hundreds of you asked the same question. You asked about the water. Not drinking water, not heating water. The water the Amish are running their trucks on. So I drove back to Lancaster County, and what I found in those barns is the same electrochemical principle a man named Yull Brown demonstrated in front of a live television audience in Australia in 1974. Split water into fuel, run the engine on the gas, the only exhaust is water vapor. The petroleum industry called it impossible. Then they spent 50 years making sure nobody tried. Here's the number that changes everything. A standard gasoline engine is 20 to 35% thermally efficient. That means for every gallon of fuel you burn, you're throwing away 65 to 80 cents of every dollar, straight out the exhaust pipe as heat. Engineers have known this since 1824 when Sadi Carnot published his thermodynamic cycle equations. The engine in your driveway is running on a 200-year-old design that was never optimized for efficiency. It was optimized for dependency. Water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom, locked together by a molecular bond. When you run electrical current through water, that bond breaks. What comes out is called HHO gas, sometimes called Brown's gas after Yull Brown himself. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, the same ratio it entered the water as. That gas is combustible, more than combustible. Hydrogen burns at a flame temperature of 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit compared to gasoline at 1,100. The energy density per unit of combustion is not even close. The problem was never whether it worked. The problem was always who it worked for. The Amish didn't read Brown's patents. They came at it from a completely different direction. In the late 1980s, a community in Lancaster County was already running small engine equipment off modified setups they called water boosters. Not full water conversion, not yet, but supplemental hydrogen injection into gasoline engines. The results, documented by a retired mechanical engineer named David Zook, who spent 4 years working alongside these communities in the mid-1990s, showed a 40 to 60% reduction in gasoline consumption across 23 different vehicles. Zook's report was never published in a peer-reviewed journal. It was published in a 47-page privately circulated document called the Lancaster Findings, and I have a copy of it. The Amish refined the system because they had no choice and no incentive to stop. They don't have dealerships. They don't have financing. They don't have a service department waiting to charge $140 an hour for diagnostics. They have barn workshops and 3 generations of mechanical intuition and absolutely zero loyalty to whatever system happens to be profitable for someone else. By 2003, a cluster of farms in the Intercourse and Bird-in-Hand areas of Lancaster County had moved past supplemental injection entirely. Full conversion. Water in, steam out, engine running. The conversion requires 4 components: an electrolyzer, a reservoir, a bubbler, and a timing adjustment. That's it. That's the entire system. Here's how it works. The electrolyzer is the heart of it. Stainless steel plates, specifically 316L marine grade stainless, are suspended in a solution of distilled water and potassium hydroxide, which is a common industrial compound you can buy at any chemical supply house for less than $20 for a quantity that lasts 2 years. Potassium hydroxide is the electrolyte. It doesn't get consumed. It just makes the water conductive. The plates are wired to the vehicle's own alternator, the same component already spinning under your hood right now, generating electricity off the engine. That electricity runs through the plates, breaks the water apart, and produces HHO gas continuously while the engine runs. The gas travels through a bubbler, a simple safety device, a jar half full of water that the gas passes through before entering the intake. If there's ever a backfire, the flame travels back through the gas line, hits the water in the bubbler, and extinguishes. No explosion. It's the same principle as a moonshiner's water seal. The Amish understood this immediately because several of them had built stills. The HHO enters the intake manifold and mixes with incoming air. At this point, the engine is running on a combination of HHO and whatever residual gasoline is in the fuel system. The final step is a timing adjustment. Hydrogen ignites faster than gasoline, so the ignition timing needs to advance by 10 to 15 degrees depending on the engine. On older vehicles, the ones the Amish almost exclusively work with, this is a physical distributor adjustment you can make with a screwdriver and a timing light in under 20 minutes. Full conversion, meaning zero gasoline, requires a larger electrolyzer array, typically 5 to 7 cell stacks rather than 1 or 2. The Amish in the Bird and Hand cluster run 7-cell arrays fabricated entirely from hardware store materials: steel bolts, rubber gaskets cut from inner tube material, CPVC fittings, and acrylic sheeting for the housing. The whole array costs between $180 and $260 in materials depending on local prices. Add a used alternator upgrade, a reservoir tank, the bubbler jar, and a set of silicone hoses rated for hydrogen, and the total conversion lands between $400 and $600 in parts. The $2,000 figure includes labor if you pay someone, a full engine tune for the timing change, a replacement alternator upgraded to higher amperage output, and a contingency margin for vehicle-specific modifications. For a man doing it himself over 2 weekends in a barn, the real number is closer to $500. Now here's where the suppression stops being a suspicion and starts being a documented fact. In 1994, a man named Stanley Meyer had developed a full water fuel cell system he called the water fuel cell, operating on similar principles to what the Amish were building independently in Pennsylvania. Meyer held 11 U.S. patents. He demonstrated his dune buggy running on water for a BBC film crew. He had meetings scheduled with the Department of Defense. In March of 1998, he sat down for dinner at a Cracker Barrel restaurant in Grove City, Ohio, stood up from the table, walked outside, collapsed in the parking lot, and died. He was 57 years old. The cause of death listed was a cerebral aneurysm. His family publicly stated they believed he was poisoned. His laboratory was cleaned out within 48 hours. His patents were buried in licensing disputes for the next decade. You can read about this in the public record. I'm not telling you what happened. I'm telling you what the record says. In 2007, a company called Hydrogen Technology Applications filed with the SEC to commercialize a device called Aquagen, a direct descendant of Brown's gas HHO technology. Within 18 months, the company had been hit with regulatory actions from 3 different state agencies simultaneously. The founder gave a deposition in which he named 2 former employees of a major petroleum conglomerate who had approached him and offered to acquire the technology for $4.3 million with a contractual clause prohibiting further development or licensing. He refused. The company was dissolved 2 years later under a series of financial pressures that his legal team described in court filings as coordinated. That deposition is a public document. Grove City, Ohio is a real town. The Cracker Barrel is still there. Meanwhile, the internal combustion engine lobby, organized primarily through the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, spent $63.4 million on federal lobbying between 2005 and 2012. During that same period, not a single alternative fuel pathway based on water electrolysis appeared in any proposed federal fuel economy standard. The people writing the emissions rules were the same people selling the engines, the same playbook, different industry. Here's what makes the Amish version of this story different from every other water fuel story you've heard. They don't care about patents. They don't care about the SEC. They don't care about what ASHRAE or the EPA or the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers thinks about their barn workshop. They are not trying to sell you anything. They built this system because diesel and gasoline prices were eating into farm margins because they fix everything themselves. And because the moment a system works inside that community, it spreads farm to farm without a single advertisement, without a single investor, without a single regulatory filing. By 2015, a researcher named Carol Ann Brandt, who spent 3 years embedded in Lancaster County communities as part of an ethnographic study on Amish technology adaptation published through a small academic press in Vermont, documented 34 separate farms running partial or full HHO conversion systems on trucks, tractors, and stationary engines. 34. Not one of them appeared in any database, any industry report, any government survey. Because the Amish don't fill out government surveys, and here's the detail that will stay with you. The Amish who run these conversions don't call it a water engine. They don't have a dramatic name for it at all. They call it the wet motor. That's it, the wet motor. Same casual familiarity they have with the earth cooling system, the spring house, the ram pump. Just another thing that works the way the world already works if you pay attention, instead of buying the thing someone else decided you needed. Now, here's what this looks like if you want to build it yourself. You need a vehicle from before 1996. This is not optional. Post-1996 vehicles have onboard diagnostic computers, the OBD2 system, that actively monitors air-to-fuel ratios through oxygen sensors and will throw fault codes and compensate against any modification to the intake mixture. The computer fights you. Older vehicles have carburetors or early throttle body injection systems that you can adjust manually without the engine management system overriding your work. The Amish almost exclusively run pre-1990 trucks and farm vehicles. This is partly tradition, it is also partly engineering pragmatism. You need a 136 amp alternator or higher. The stock alternator on most older trucks runs 60 to 80 amps. Roughly 30 of those amps are already spoken for by your ignition, lights, and accessories. Your electrolyzer array needs a minimum of 30 amps of clean, dedicated current to produce sufficient HHO volume for engine operation. A 136 amp alternator upgrade runs $80 to $140 at any auto parts store or online. It installs in under an hour. Your cell plates need to be 316L stainless, not 304. Not regular stainless from the hardware store. 316L is marine grade. It resists the electrochemical corrosion that will eat any other grade of steel within weeks. You cut them to fit your housing, drill a pattern of holes to increase surface area, and sand the edges smooth. The plates are separated by rubber gaskets. The whole stack is compressed with bolts running through acrylic or CPVC end caps. Distilled water only, not tap water, not filtered water. Tap water minerals coat the plates and reduce output within days. The potassium hydroxide concentration needs to sit between 20 and 28% by weight. Below that, conductivity is too low. Above it, you generate excess heat and accelerate plate corrosion. A digital kitchen scale and a glass measuring cup get you there in 10 minutes. Route your HHO line from the bubbler to the intake before the carburetor throat, not into the air filter housing before the throat, so the gas mixes fully with incoming air before it enters the combustion chamber. Use only hydrogen-rated silicone hose. Standard vacuum hose is not rated for hydrogen's molecular size. The gas will permeate through it over time, and you will develop a leak you cannot find by smell. Advance your timing 12 degrees from wherever the factory spec sits. Test drive. If the engine pings under load, back it off 2 degrees at a time until it stops. Hydrogen burns clean and fast, and the T-iming change is what converts that faster burn into power rather than knock. The system the Amish run in bird in hand has logged, according to Brandt's documentation, sustained operation periods of 18 to 24 months between any maintenance interval. The maintenance itself consists of draining and refilling the electrolyte solution and inspecting the plate surfaces for scaling. Total time, under 2 hours. Total cost, the price of distilled water and a small quantity of potassium hydroxide. Compare that to the average American spending $3,200 a year on gasoline at current prices. Compare it to the average new car payment of $726 a month. Compare it to an oil change every 5,000 miles that exists solely because petroleum combustion produces acids and carbon deposits that water combustion does not produce at all. The service economy built around the internal combustion engine, oil changes, fuel filters, catalytic converters, oxygen sensors, fuel injector cleaning, exhaust system replacement, all of it exists because gasoline is a dirty fuel that destroys the components it passes through. Water combustion leaves steam. Steam doesn't foul injectors, steam doesn't coat catalytic converters, steam doesn't produce the carbon deposits that require an oil change every 90 days. The $2,000 conversion doesn't just eliminate your fuel cost. It eliminates an entire category of maintenance that exists only because the system you're replacing was designed to need it. Amish understood this without ever framing it that way. They just noticed their wet motor engines ran cleaner. Fewer carbon deposits on the valves, oil that stayed cleaner longer, engines that lasted. In 1974, Yul Brown demonstrated his gas in front of a camera. In 1998, Stanley Meyer died in a parking lot in Ohio. In 2007, Hydrogen Technology Applications was dissolved under what its founder called coordinated pressure. In 2015, 34 Amish farms in Lancaster County were quietly running their trucks on water and calling it the wet motor. The petroleum industry is worth $4.7 trillion a year globally. Every wet motor running in a barn in Lancaster County represents one more customer they will never have again. One truck that will never pull into a gas station. One engine that will never need the oil they refine, the filters they manufacture, or the service contracts they fund through the dealership networks they built specifically to maintain the dependency they engineered into every vehicle sold since 1950. The Amish didn't lose this knowledge because they never let anyone take it. It lived in barn workshops and spread farm to farm through the same informal networks that carry every piece of practical knowledge inside those communities. Nobody patented it. Nobody filed for an SEC exemption. Nobody scheduled a meeting with the Department of Defense. They just built it, drove it, showed their neighbor, and went back to work. You already know what the ground under your house does. Now you know what the water in your tap can do. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what year your vehicle is and whether you have a carburetor or fuel injection. Tell me what you pay for gas each month, because that number is about to look very different to you. If your grandfather ever talked about a man in your county who ran his tractor on something other than diesel, I want to hear about it, because that man existed in more places than Lancaster County, and those stories are exactly the thread this series follows next. Next week, I'm going to show you how the Amish have been converting plain tap water into combustible gas since the 1970s, a process so simple it requires nothing more than a mason jar, 2 metal rods, and a 12-volt battery you already have in your garage. The Department of Energy reviewed a version of this system in 2004 and quietly shelved the report. The researcher who submitted it requested a FOIA disclosure of the internal review notes in 2009. What came back was 34 pages with every technical conclusion redacted. The method itself was never classified, just the part where they admitted it worked.